Have you ever wondered what truly drives the Prince of all Saiyans? Vegeta, a being of unparalleled power, began his journey as a ruthless intergalactic tyrant. But what transformed this relentless warrior into someone who, despite all his pride, also fights to protect those he loves? His rivalry with Goku was merely the surface of a mind tormented by an inferiority complex and an incessant quest for self-improvement. Get ready to see Vegeta in a completely new light, unraveling the psychological mechanisms behind his arrogance, his wounded pride, and his eventual path to a surprising transformation. What you're about to discover will forever change how you perceive the Saiyan Prince. In the vast and unforgiving universe of Dragon Ball Z, Vegeta's story begins in a world that knew only the law of the strongest. Planet Vegeta, home of the Saiyan warrior race. From birth, the prince was destined to be an elite warrior, born with the latent potential to be the most powerful of them all. He grew up imbued with an unwavering belief in the superiority of his royal lineage and his own exceptional strength. His environment was shaped by brutal conquest, the annihilation of entire planets, and relentless subservience to Frieza, the tyrannical emperor who controlled the Saiyans' destiny with an iron fist, crushing any insubordination. In this brutal and utterly devoid of human warmth context, where weakness was seen as a fatal flaw and compassion a dangerous anomaly, young Vegeta absorbed profoundly distorted values of power and domination. The almost complete absence of affection and care, combined with constant pressure for impeccable results and unquestionable victories, molded an arrogant, cold, calculating, and extremely individualistic personality. His first and most evident psychological trait is pathological narcissism, an inflated ego that makes him believe he is the center of the universe and, without a doubt, the strongest of all living beings. Anyone who dared to challenge his authority, his power, or even his mere presence was seen as an insignificant obstacle to be removed without the slightest hesitation or remorse. The lack of paternal or maternal figures who could offer a model of empathy, compassion, or emotional connection left him vulnerable to limited emotional development, prioritizing brute force, domination, and the maintenance of his superiority above any other moral or ethical value. He was the prince of a warrior race, and in his mind, this meant he was invincible, deserving of adoration and everything he desired. His identity was intrinsically linked to his power and his title, which, ironically, created an extremely fragile basis for his self-esteem, dependent on constant external validation. But there was something no one saw coming, an unexpected seed of change that would be abruptly planted, shaking the foundations of his pride. The moment of rupture for Vegeta occurred with an impact as devastating as a planet's explosion. His encounter and eventual humiliating defeat by Kakarot, the low-class Saiyan he so despised, better known as Goku. What was meant to be a routine and easy conquest mission on Earth turned into an absolute nightmare for the prince's unyielding pride. This defeat, at the hands of someone he considered an aberration among Saiyans, planted a seed of doubt and despair, beginning to dismantle the seemingly solid structure of his self-esteem and identity. From this crucial point, Vegeta began to transform. However, it wasn't a transformation for the better initially, but rather an intensification of his obsessions. The defeat didn't make him retreat from his pursuit of power. On the contrary, it triggered an intense and agonizing internal conflict. On one hand, his innate arrogance and Saiyan pride vehemently refused to accept that a low-class Saiyan could surpass him. His mind desperately fought against the very reality of the facts. On the other hand, the harsh and irrefutable truth of having been defeated planted a corrosive seed of doubt, vulnerability, and, later, of a deep and constant envy towards Goku. His external conflict was clear and direct. Surpass Goku at all costs. Prove his supremacy once and for all, eliminating any shadow of doubt. But internally, He struggled with an overwhelming cognitive dissonance, the painful incompatibility between his grandiose self-image of an invincible prince and the harsh, undeniable reality of his failure. Psychology would explain this transformation as a process of narcissistic injury. When an individual with narcissistic traits suffers a major defeat or humiliation that challenges their perceived grandiosity, their sense of worth is brutally shaken. Instead of healthy introspection and an acknowledgement of their limitations, the common reaction is to intensify the search for external validation and prove their worth, often in an aggressive, obsessive, and even self-destructive manner. For Vegeta, Goku became the mirror of his own insecurity and the vulnerability he so detested in himself and others. Each time he saw his rival advance, the wound deepened and the obsession to surpass him grew stronger, consuming him from within. He didn't see Goku as merely a rival to be beaten for sport or glory, but as a personal affront to his very existence and his royal title. And it was there that everything began to crumble, giving way to a relentless pursuit of power that would lead him to dangerous extremes. Vegeta's mind, now distorted by humiliation and a growing inferiority complex, began to mold itself into a relentless obsession for self-improvement. This obsession became the central engine of his existence. His attitudes, words, and decisions from this crucial point reveal a new way of thinking, focused solely on becoming stronger than Goku, at any cost and by any means. He subjects himself to extreme, almost self-destructive training, pushing his body and mind to the brink of exhaustion, and seeks new transformations, such as Super Saiyan, not out of an altruistic desire to protect someone or the universe, but out of a selfish and visceral impulse for supremacy. Every cell of his being cried out to be number one, to prove he was the most powerful, no matter the price. We can see this clearly in his frequent internal monologues, where he constantly compares his strength to Goku's, criticizing his emotional weaknesses, his compassion, and his apparent lack of Saiyan pride. It's as if he's in an endless race against himself, where the podium only has room for one, and that one has to be him, the prince. With each new display of Goku's power, whether a new technique, a new transformation, or an act of heroism, Vegeta's despair and frustration intensified, further fueling his unhealthy determination. He saw Goku's evolution not just as a challenge, but as an existential threat to his own identity and his place in the universe. We can use the analogy of competition as an addiction to understand Vegeta's behavior. Just as an addict needs increasingly larger doses of their substance to feel the same effect, Vegeta needs increasingly higher levels of power to appease his insecurity and the latent pain of his narcissistic wound. The comparison with social comparison theory, developed by psychologist Leon Festinger, perfectly illustrates this obsessive behavior. Individuals evaluate themselves and build their self-image by comparing themselves with others. And for Vegeta, this comparison was always upward with Goku, which perpetuated a vicious cycle of dissatisfaction, excessive effort, and deep frustration when he failed to achieve his goal. He was trapped in a labyrinth of self-imposition and incessant demands, where the only apparent way out seemed to be overwhelming and unquestionable victory over his rival. But the true monster still lay dormant, a darker face of his pride and despair, waiting for the opportunity to awaken. The act of total transgression, the point of no return for Vegeta, is dramatically reached when he consciously allows Babi's evil influence to dominate him, transforming into Majin Vegeta. This choice is not a mere slip, a momentary error, or an impulsive act. It is a deliberate and calculated decision to yield to a dark and corrupting power in order to, in his distorted mind, free himself from the emotional shackles he believed were preventing him from surpassing Goku. In doing so, he seeks to suppress the emotions that humanized him, such as his growing and disturbing attachment to his family and even camaraderie with the Z-Fighters, and embrace once again the cruelty, coldness, and ruthlessness that defined him in his distant past. As a true Saiyan, His worldview completely shifts, becoming even more utilitarian, nihilistic, and focused exclusively on his own gain. He rationalizes his decision as the only way to reach his full potential, to be the true Saiyan Prince, free from sentimentalism that, in his view, only weakened him. He begins to see emotions as intrinsic weaknesses, an insurmountable obstacle to the pure and unyielding strength he so coveted and believed was his by birthright. Morality and ethics are cast aside, dismissed as irrelevant in favor of a selfish and megalomaniacal goal. He convinces himself, with a perverse internal logic, that the path of darkness and cruelty is the only true path for an elite Saiyan, the only way to his true greatness and recognition. He doesn't care about the destruction or the lives lost in his wake, as long as it leads him to his ultimate goal, proving his superiority. This leads us to a disturbing and somber dilemma. What if he's right? What if, to achieve an unimaginable level of power, a warrior truly needs to shed all attachments, all emotional ties, and embrace a more ruthless and selfish side? Vegeta himself questions in one of his most iconic monologues, his voice filled with pain and conviction. What was I fearing? Being a ruthless killer like I was before? Yes, a ruthless killer, but a true Saiyan. This statement reveals the deep internal struggle and the psychological justification he constructs for himself, transforming what would be an act of pure evil into an existential necessity for his own identity and purpose. Vegeta's mind, at that moment of surrender to evil, transformed into an impenetrable fortress of rationalizations, where every violent act, every questionable decision was justified in the name of his Saiyan nature and his relentless pursuit of superiority. The line between good and evil blurred, leaving only the blind pursuit of power. Chapter 5. The Science of Horror. The unrelenting logic of internal destruction. Delving deeper into the psychological analysis of Majin Vegeta, we realize that his behavior, however shocking and destructive, makes an eerily coherent sense within his own distorted and self-centered logic. He doesn't act out of random madness or an uncontrollable psychotic break. Instead, he operates from a cold and precise calculation of how to achieve what he desires most, to surpass Goku and, finally, reaffirm his identity and worth as the Prince of all Saiyans. This destructive logic is a brutal manifestation of his deep and continuous identity crisis, exacerbated by his never-healing narcissistic wound. Self-determination theory, for example, helps us understand that the need for competence and the pursuit of autonomy are some of the basic, psychological needs of human beings. Vegeta, feeling his competence as a supreme warrior threatened by Goku, desperately seeks to restore it and reassert his autonomy over his own destiny, even if it means resorting to extreme and morally reprehensible means. His logic rests on an inflexible belief that by eliminating his weak emotions, such as compassion, love, and loyalty, and embracing the dark power offered by Babidi and inherent ruthlessness, he would become invincible and thus finally validate his existence as the Saiyan Prince. He sees emotional weakness as the only obstacle to his unlimited potential, a dangerous illusion. We can draw parallels with real-life cases of individuals who, driven by an intense obsession, an overwhelming inferiority complex, or a desperate need for validation, make decisions that seem irrational or even repulsive to the majority of society, but which for them are the only logical and valid options. People who subject themselves to exhausting training, social isolation, or even risk their own safety and that of others in pursuit of a specific goal, often do so under the guise of an internal logic that prioritizes that goal above all else, including morality, well-being, and life itself. For Vegeta, the humiliation of being surpassed by Goku was such an unbearable and existential pain that any means were justified to eradicate it, including his own surrender to darkness. He convinced himself that, to be the best, he had to be the most ruthless. It wasn't madness. It was cold calculation, forged in the fire of envy, wounded pride, and a desperate search for identity. Chapter 6. The Legacy of Chaos. The conclusion of a myth in transformation and redemption. What remains after Vegeta's turbulent and violent journey, marked by unyielding arrogance, obsessive rivalry, and a relentless pursuit of power at any cost? Surprisingly, he, who once personified cruelty and the selfish pursuit of supremacy, emerges from his trials as an incredibly complex character in constant transformation. Although his Saiyan pride remains intact, a fundamental and inseparable part of his essence, it is now tempered by a deep and, at times, reluctant sense of responsibility and affection for his family, especially Bulma and Trunks. The destruction he caused in his past and the twisted path of his own redemption have shaped not only his own soul, but also the world around him, influencing his enemies, his allies, and, significantly, future generations of warriors. The consequences of his gradual transformation are visible and impactful throughout the Dragon Ball universe. He becomes a crucial ally in various epic battles, fighting alongside those he once despised. More than that, his growing desire to protect his family leads him to acts of heroism and sacrifice that would have been absolutely unthinkable for the arrogant and cold prince he once was. His rivalry with Goku, although still present and serving as a catalyst for his continuous self-improvement, takes on a more mature form, one of mutual respect and motivation for both of their development and surpassing of limits. It is no longer just about blind envy, but about the desire to equal and surpass a friend-rival, to push each other's boundaries for a greater good. This leads us to a profound philosophical and moral reflection. Who are we to judge someone's path to redemption? Vegeta, with all his flaws, his dark deeds, and his tortuous journey, shows us that true self-improvement doesn't mean erasing the past or forgetting who one was, but rather learning from it, accepting one's shadows, and using them as a catalyst for a different, more fulfilling, and meaningful future. His story is a powerful reminder that greatness can emerge from the most unlikely seeds, and that even the proudest and most ruthless of hearts can find a path to human connection, empathy, and the protection of those they love. He is living proof that change is possible, even for those who seem lost. But perhaps he was not the last to tread this complex and challenging path in search of redemption and self-improvement. Vegeta's journey leaves us with the intriguing question about the potential for transformation within each of us. Final. From relentless arrogance to an unexpected capacity for sacrifice, Vegeta's psychological journey challenges us to question what truly defines a hero or a villain. He reminds us that true strength doesn't lie solely in raw power or victory over others, but in the ability to transcend one's own limitations, confront traumas, and find a purpose that extends far beyond the ego. The Prince of all Saiyans is, after all, a complex mirror of our own internal struggles. The quest for validation, the weight of pride, and the sometimes reluctant desire to protect what truly matters. His story is a somber and powerful reminder. The line between the self and the other is thin, and self-improvement doesn't always happen in the most obvious way. After all, who would have thought that the Prince of Pride would learn to love,